I'm Jason Brett. We started Product Coffee back in August last year as a way to kind of bring the Product Camp Atlanta experience online without doing a full day of webinars for everybody to sit through. And the way this works is, as you see, we get to know each other in a little bit more personal way than you typically do on a webinar, but we're going to have some great educational content here as well. And we do a few things as we're working through this that are made possible by our sponsors. We've got 3 great sponsors for Product Coffee this year so far. And the first is Method, which is a digital software development agency, as well as doing customer experience consulting and digital strategy. We do quite a bit, everything from product strategy all the way to first generation product delivery and even beyond. So if you would check out method.com and thank our sponsors. If you're looking to accelerate your roadmap or bring focus to your roadmap, there are a lot of things that Method can do to help you. Check them out and thank them for sponsoring Product Coffee as well. We also want to thank Pragmatic Institute, who is probably the best known name in product management training and certification in the world. They've been sponsoring product camps and Product Coffee since the very beginning. We want to give them a great deal of thanks. If you're thinking about product management professional education, Pragmatic Institute is a great place to evaluate and a great team to work with. We've got a session on the YouTube channel that talks about different certifications and how those programs work, both as an individual and as organization. And there was a lot of commentary from our audience on their experiences with Pragmatic and other certification organizations as well. So check them out. And finally, featureupvote.com is a tool for product managers that lets you collect feedback from your customers and allows them to vote on their suggestions as a group to give you a really good sense of the enhancements, the issues that are most impacting your customers, that are most interesting to your customers at any given time. Featureupvote.com provides our ideas forum at productcoffee.com/ideas, and you can use that to make suggestions for future sessions that you might like to see or hear. And you can vote on suggestions that other people have made, like Steve. Chuck is the Director of Product Management at DigiCert, and he's also an instructor at General Assembly. He's been around the block more than a few times, and he and I were talking the other day. We've been talking for the last month and a half about different frameworks and methodologies for prioritizing and bringing product management into your organization. And Chuck's been studying these frameworks for a long time and has found that, it's great to take an off-the-shelf framework and use it as a foundation. But what Chuck's found is that it's just a foundation, and he's gone on and enrolled his own frameworks for success at DigiCert and other places that he's been. And Chuck's going to talk to us about what he's learned and how he's approached that today. And then we'll have a good town hall with some good group discussion. So having said that, I'm going to switch the camera back over and welcome Chuck to the stage.
Hi, y'all. Thank you for the introduction. I am glad I'm not following Dan Olson. So I can lead up, so he'll look really good after this. He's definitely worth it if you haven't read his book and you weren't part of the piece. Great stuff. What I'm going to cover today, too, is going to feel very product management frameworky, surprising. Prior to getting into product proper, I was involved in the media space with Cox Media Group from their early forays onto the internet and digital transition for the media. So a lot of what I learned along the way is germane for what we're doing with product, because product really, no matter the framework, is really about making sure you've got a cultural change you can reinforce. And the frameworks really are kind of those loops that help you do that. But if you don't change the culture, it doesn't matter what you put in place, because there is no magic checklist. Let me get the window I actually want. So I joined DigiCert partially as a person to help them change their product management processes at the fundamental level and look at what they need to do on an operational basis. So I'm trying to kind of look at how I help the PMs, how we help our customers and the company as if I'm providing a product to them. So slight disagreement with Steve. I do believe an MVP has to be a product because it's got to be valuable, usable, and feasible. Thank you, Marty Kagan. Which means it's got to be sufficiently product enough to matter to the user. Prototyping is inherently important, should happen along the way, Some of what I talk about here, honestly, is a mix of minimum viable prototyping and producting. Just remember, the operations you're putting out there are to serve your PMs and the company and improve the product that's coming out to your customers, whoever they may be. So you're fighting, if you're developing your product operations, for that market share of ideas within your company to get the buy-in from the stakeholders and the leadership. And the best way you can do that is simply by showing things work. Companies love to be able to throw down things fully baked and say, follow this and everything will be magical. It has been my experience that unless you're a very tightly integrated supply chain, say maybe reporting all the way to print edition pieces, that rarely works because there's gonna be some friction. There's gonna be some area that works out. So you may have the objective in mind, but you've got to start with the pieces to put that in place to give the people the feedback. So just like anything else, you got to love the problem. You've got to understand your market. What are the current problems the PMs are having? I came in, started interviewing the PMs. What's the biggest problem you see? What's working? What's not? Have a lot of brilliant people at DigiCert, but not necessarily great processes because of how the company has organically grown over the years and acquired larger companies. So we ended up with kind of a mishmash of processes and so on, and talented people acting as project managers in some cases, and others working as solid product managers in the way we want them to be. So a lot of that is identifying what isn't working, right? The leadership can tell you what isn't working from their side, but they tend to be looking at outcome. And then they will symptomize what's going on internally as the reason for this outcome. They may be right. They're often right in broad strokes, but in terms of what's the medicine to actually fix this, it becomes a bit more of an investigation and trial and error. So when you're coming in, there may be the easy stuff and the small details, documentation, organization you can fix. But is that going to have the cultural change you need in the feedback loop you want to have in place? So I'm a big fan of the build, measure, learn, or I like to say learn, measure, build, but it doesn't roll off the tongue as well. Understand what's going on, understand the problems, look for the key gaps, the strengths and weaknesses you need to address. And especially here, you need to look at the cultural problems. Do you have chaos monkeys running around? Are there people who have been taught that they need to cover their butts or will not take responsibility because they've been burned in the past? Are there trust issues? Are there people who are just going to do what it takes to get done and you need to rein them in because they're a little too rogue? What are the constraints we have? How fast can we move? We're a very compliance-driven company. We can't afford to break things because then our SSL sites won't work on browsers, or Apple will reject us, or our customers will not trust us. So while we're doing all this stuff, we have to make sure everything works and is in place, and the necessary bureaucracy, and I believe there is some necessary bureaucracy, although it's a bad word, has to be kept. You're just trying to find ways around it. And at the end, do we have the fundamentals in place? Now, most of you folks are on these calls, so chances are you've been exposed to Agile or Lean or whatever. So when we talk fundamentals, we are probably all talking about similar things. The peers you've joined may not. They may have come up as product managers fully organically, much the way I did in my original job, and haven't had exposure to the current ideas on product iteration. Or they're good products, but they're working from a different set of fundamentals. So when I'm talking fundamentals, I'm talking, are we all on the same page about the little things we do? You know, if you think about like stereotypical karate, right? You've got the how we throw a punch versus the boxer throwing a punch. They're both punches. They both have similar outcomes. But if we're trying to talk about punches, it helps to know we're talking about a right hook versus a cross. Are we talking the same language? And then more importantly, and this is the tougher part, especially when you get into roles where you're working with people who might be another director of product management, but your job is to do the operations or other people, is do we have the capabilities? I've always hated this because I'm a big believer anybody can learn everything, but the reality is not everybody wants to learn everything or do everything. Many developers are developers because they don't want to be product managers. They think that is a horrible, horrible job. And I've been told they would rather die than be a product manager, right? So are we putting people organically, because of the way the business goes, in positions that they may be reasonably effective, but they're never going to optimize because they really don't have the desire, interest to put that? Or do they just need training? Or is this a clear skill, mismatch? So that's a lot of little things you've got to keep track. So I've talked about that, the fundamentals. The first thing, because we're going for cultural, is get online with what the required fundamentals are going to be. What do we agree between leadership and operations are the minimum operating capacities that all of our folks may have? And this may be iterative. This year, we're just going to get everybody writing good, consistent user stories and acceptance criteria that the VPs of sales and marketing can understand, or anybody outside your product value stream can understand what you're building, even if they don't do this. And this is especially true if you have multiple PMs across multiple product streams. So a lot of what we did early on was we brought in product board and set some make work. And I went to the PMs and I said, for now, and I'll come back to this when I'm talking about looking at how things did in measuring success, this is going to feel a little make worky, but I need you to do it because here's what the outcome we're aiming for, so that I can have roadmaps and stories that we can talk upward. I need you to do the little extra work of putting it in here, and we'll enter it here and walk through. Just some basics around proper and consistent stories, and not the shorthand that tends to arise after years of the PM and the engineering guys all working together. They all know what they're talking about, but unless you're US Special Forces, you have no idea what that 7-letter acronym means. Backlogs being prioritized. So when I joined, we were just Confluence and Jira. They did not have any other tools to really assist them. Every PM group, and we had 2 product groups at the time, kind of managed things in the way they saw fit. And some of those were really efficient, some of those weren't. It really just depended on the people involved. But there wasn't a common source of truth for the rest of the business. There wasn't a common source of truth for everybody else to see where everybody else is working. So along with proper user stories and acceptance criteria, which, yes, this sounds remedial, but in my teaching and in my consulting, you would be surprised what brilliant people at brilliant companies are not doing. Having the backlog in Jira not be 200 items long. And whatever items you have being prioritized so we can just grab off the top and work this. Now, if you're Kanban, that makes perfect sense. But a lot of people build sprints just ad hoc based on what they feel the flavor of the moment is need or what engineering has told them. And it's not just DigiCert. This is companies I've seen everywhere. So you'll see that spectrum within the folks. Get them in on that. In our case, we asked them to plan 2 to 3 sprints out. Telling them, yeah, I know that 3rd and 4th sprint are going to be completely different by the time they reach us. That's fine. I just want to know you know where you're going. And I trust that you know where you're going, but I can't see it. So I'm asking you to make this visible to me. One of the key things I went into everybody, because I was an outsider coming into very technical PMs, was coming into them to say, hey, I'm not here to tell you you're doing anything wrong or right. Frankly, I don't know. I am here to make sure we're all moving in the same direction and doing the same things. So I am not here to tell you you're wrong and bite your head off. I don't care about any of that. We just want to move towards these ways, and I need you to help me with this. And I want feedback on all of these things I'm asking you to do. So get the fundamentals down so we know that at least if we're looking to a ticket or the next couple of things, we can have a conversation of where we're at. Again, you'd be surprised how varied this goes. Attending these things as I have, you'd think everybody was following at least what we would consider the minimum viable product operations. A lot of companies simply are not. They just haven't learned. So frameworks, once we get past the fundamentals, everybody has their favorite framework, right? Your favorite author. I like to say I like lean, but I don't really work lean. But I love build, measure, learn. I've come from the large enterprise. Execution is a problem, despite the fact they put out lots of stuff all the time. Enterprises, generally, the biggest issue is, are we executing on the right things and in the right way and with the right amount of time? So I tend to bias towards let's get something out there and then learn from it. Now, I'm on a very large compliance company. There are constraints to what we can put out there and see what happens. Because I can't have Apple going, oh, well, you just broke everything on there, right? That would be bad. So minimum viable product or prototype is subjective to where you're at. You may have to do a lot more planning and building to get to that MVP than you would as a startup that just wants to understand, if we do this simple thing, will people click the button? So with frameworks, I like to think, I'm an old philosophy major, the Platonic ideal, right? I would love to lift any of them down and throw them in and make it work. It generally doesn't. And I will tell you why. We are in the product for the last couple of years has been in the same maturity phase that Agile was about 10 years ago, which means people have heard of it. They just want to throw it down and boom, it's going to work. It doesn't. These are cultural changes. The frameworks are steps to reinforce cultural changes and ideally have proper feedback loops. So you go, ooh, that saved me time. Ooh, I put out something really cool. Ooh, I didn't get fired. All these things that help us go, okay, this is why I want to repeat this process. Additionally, there are frameworks in frameworks. Jason mentioned, we've got prioritization framework. We've got discovery frameworks. We've got, you name it, IDEO as the masters, build, measure, learn, continuous discovery, all these. And all of them have great nuggets. My personal belief is they all come back to build, measure, learn, because in the end, if we're doing it right, we have some hypothesis that we're going to test and we're going to get some feedback and we're going on it. The details differ in what is our lag time in those cycles and what we're attempting to learn, and also what is the build time we have to have for these things. So when I talk about frameworks on here, your mileage may vary. And I'm not going to give you a framework. In fact, I'm going to give you a very loosey-goosey philosophy 101 way to approach, if you're starting product operations, especially in an enterprise, how you want to conceptualize things and then do what works for you and your company. That is the framework. The only way you're going to know about that is by testing, getting feedback from the PMs, and making sure you didn't break anything. But I'll come back to frameworks a little bit later on. So you got to build something right now. We got to do something. And as I said, you want to pick the thing that's going to have the most impact. What's the biggest point of friction right now? So it might be the fundamentals. I think you should always do a gut check on the fundamentals before you move forward. But assuming you've got those down, you've got to look at what changes can we deliver that are not going to break things. So the model very much here is you are flying the airplane and you're swapping out an engine. You can't crash the plane. Might be able to delay the plane, it can go slower, it can go faster, maybe it goes to Albuquerque, but you're still getting to the destination. You want to, especially in the enterprise, and I think even in startups too, where we got magic checklists, don't do anything you don't have to do bureaucratically. What are we doing that is useless? Can we pull this out? What is useless stuff? So part of my framework is what's the least amount of documentation we can do? What's the least amount of bureaucracy we can do that gets us what we need? And if you live in a compliance or federally regulated area, that's harder. There's a lot of documentation on those sides, but you also need to be developing product for those audits. So a lot of discussions I've been having with my compliance group is coming into this is going, why are we treating this as a layer on top of? If I'm building something that I know needs to be compliant, why aren't they part of the cross-functional product team? Or I would make it a product quadro, I guess, as opposed to trios that Toy Stories would say. Compliance, design, engineering, and product. So that when we're building and we know we've got these things, we know we've got to do release notes, we know we've got to do documentation, a lot of us don't do it. Build that into the process so that we build for the compliance, we build for those things, because that is an internal piece the company needs. Provide clarity, especially around what you don't know. People always kind of shake their heads when the consultants come in. Well, they're just going to pay them to tell them something we told them for relatively free before. you need to give them the roadmap. Why are we transforming this? What do I expect this? What's in it for you? The biggest failures around this, go back to culture again. Most things on resistance to culture tend to be fear-based because I don't want to lose my job. And let's face it, over the last 15 years, people can be afraid, depending on the environment they're in, that at the greatest whim, my company's pretty good. Or you're just giving them more work so that you're pushing that responsibility down on me. You've taken the risk off of your role and you've given it to me. So what's in it for them? Why should they change? Why will their job ideally be better? How can you demonstrate that? We talk about showing our customers a basic roadmap. We should be talking internally about everybody internally. I'm a big believer in radical transparency. I'm a believer, although I'm a softie, in radical candor. I'm working on that. And I'm a big believer in people are generally smart enough to get this stuff. Just because they're a developer and don't necessarily speak marketing or business doesn't mean they're ignorant. It just means that they don't understand. So we've got to pull these things and you've got to have everybody on board so that they're willing to try the experiment with you. And the other issue too is if it doesn't work, we will change it. I am starting with a hypothesis. I'm just a guy. I am not Steve Jobs. We're going to do some of this wrong. You are going to fail. This comes back to fear. My job isn't when you fail to come in and smack you with the rulers and tell you not to do it again. My job is to come back and say, did the system fail you? Why didn't this work? How do we not have this happen again? So we can work. So the system is working for the product manager. These are not things we impose. These are the things we should be living. If that buy-in comes there and they feel safe, it makes it a whole lot easier for them to go, hey, will you be my test bunny if we try this? Sure. Because at that point, I only have to gain. If I lose it, it's minor stuff. And that's the hardest thing to come out, especially if you're coming from legacy companies, that you acquired a company that was really out of date in their business modes and their process modes, and everybody's scared because they got acquired. You want to understand they're part of the team and you're working for them. So product operations isn't the thing you do to them, it's this thing you do for them. So communicate, 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 ask for feedback, accept feedback, especially if you are wrong. And if you are wrong, admit it. It's one thing I think product managers, more than any other profession, are better at than most people in leadership positions. We will change with the evidence because we care about outcome. We don't care that we got the outcome, but you did all the things the way I wanted you to. Right? We'll come back and say, I would have preferred you did it this way because it would have helped me here, but in the end, hey, this worked nice. We worry about outcomes. Let the smart people do their jobs. As a PM, my job is to help my stakeholders do their jobs better so they can deliver something awesome for me because I'm not doing the work, right? As a product operations person, my job is to make life better for the PMs so they can do awesome, really super stuff. And I look good because they succeed. So did we get rerouted to Albuquerque? Why did we get rerouted to Albuquerque when we changed that engine? Is it a systemic problem? Is this just something that happened? What's working? What's not? What's missing? What new problems did we invent by solving old problems? Iterate and adjust. So again, you've got your outcome in mind, and this might be the broader thing we're going to reach in a year and a half, or this might be, does this prioritization method, RICE, we saw the RICE thing last week, does that one work for us? Is it too much effort? Can we be more efficient? What do we mix and match? What ideas do you as a PM have that would make this better? Just like learning from our customers and having our customers essentially tell us what they need built, we need the PMs to tell us what they need to do their jobs. And that's the 5 whys. That's questioning. That's not just taking at their word. It's understanding what are the forces in play. And that's hard. I mean, it's hard for any business leader when you're doing change. Also from the stakeholders. So I deal a lot with UX, and I would say we weren't using our UX people properly. Some of that's bandwidth. Some of that's just a misunderstanding of where they fit into, or where they should fit into the process, I should say. So in talking to them and talking to product, I was hearing one set of things from product and one set of things from UX. And if I'd taken it at face value, it was really just an issue of timing. In reality, we were doing UX's process in product wrong. It was a systemic problem. So we are working on iterating them out from this, because right now everything's working in our sprint level. I want to get it out. So we are doing prototypes and user testing before we get into doing any code level development or really necessarily even architecting stuff. We'll have some discussions on there. That's taking a while because we've got a limited set of resources that are working very close to execution, and you're trying to slowly widen that piece out and not break anything. And it's getting buy-in, and it's making the other PMs understand that the process is wrong coming from there. So you want to hear out the stakeholders, and you want to understand what they're doing because they are part of your customer base. Adjust, improve. And I'm ahead of myself on a slide. Part of this comes back to, and based on what did we learn is, yeah, we want the PMs to comply, right? We want them to do the things we're asking them. Are there levers and carrots? You may run into bad actors who are just simply resistant for the sake of resisting, or we didn't provide the right feedback for them to understand why this is critical. So what do we need to do? And the last ditch is you're going to do it, and I'm going to watch you do it because we need you to do it. Now, you don't want to get there because I think that's a failure in leadership and communication. That's my personal bias. It's my bias mostly because I think it happens enough that it's happened in enough quantity that it's probably me that's the issue combined with them. So what do they need to, do they need training? Do they need more efficiency, more training and coaching? Or do they need more, listen, I appreciate you believe this, but we need you to comply for now. And we've tried to understand, but I need you to do this. If you don't understand, we will continue talking about it. But for now, and for the next 3 weeks, you need to do X. And we will come back after 3 weeks to make sure these things are happening. You may end up having those conversations and you have to be prepared for them. But it's always much better to get their buy-in and have them happily go with it than push it down, which most restructurings tend to do. What's the next biggest gap we have to hit? What's the next biggest risk for us getting towards our platonic ideal of the overall framework in place? What can we do to make that happen? What can we do to test? How long do we need to test? Hypothesize, put it out there, talk to PMs, set up a time frame. We're going to try doing this. So I went from product board, making sure that we're running user stories, to building out objectives and OKRs and saying, you need to make sure your key epics are tied to OKRs and objectives so that we can make sure we are tied to the company's strategic goals. So now that you know what you're building, do you know what you're building and how it ties back to what the company is trying to accomplish itself or for its customers? So we are iteratively working back and getting them out of project and more into the strategic role of PMs. They're great at executing, but they don't know why they're executing certain things. Not everybody, but some. So how do we get them to understand the strategic roles and where the roadmap plays in and actual timing? Iteration after that comes down to, okay, product specs. Why are we building this? Who is it for? Why should we build this? What is the problem? So as I said, we're compliance driven. There's a lot of moving parts. Every feature has some element of projectiness to it. Sometimes it's just 1 or 2 little checklists we got to do. Sometimes you need a PM, project manager to come in and assist you because it's multiple PMs, multiple stakeholders, and we need to organize those things. As the PM, we try to focus that leadership on the PM knowing these things so that they are essentially the sponsor and the leadership for that, and then they can work with the project office to figure out what needs to happen. But we're moving towards fully project specs, personas, the whole bit, so that we have a common living document that starts out by focusing on, do you understand the problem and the scope of the problem? And if you can answer that, then the next stage is, what are we doing to solve it? And that's where the next iteration is the product trio or quattro, depending on your ring, that comes in and says, okay, you, the PM, are not responsible for figuring out the solution on this. The team is. You are responsible for bringing the team into this. And that we can do this at far enough out, we can figure out what needs to be done and move these things. So in the end, what we get to, and Steve had mentioned the Quartz Open. I like it. Had discovered it after talking to him. I think what's great about that one is they actually kind of captured the business speak aspect of it that really communicates to the management side without talking more at the product level to the PMs. So it's everybody understands build, measure, learn, but when you start talking about it as a process, the business side starts kind of losing because they don't work that way. Quartz, I think, had some good built-in language that I had not translated myself into that. But at its core, apologies, it's a build, measure, learn, and delivery thing. They're working very well with what's going on in the enterprise. So my platonic ideal is that process overlaid with continuous discovery. And I would say discovery is probably the thing most companies are worst at. And if we can get there, then we've at least iterated all up. We've got enough going on. Now, is it going to be pure on any sense? Probably not. We'll have mixed pieces in there. The PMs should have the ability to pick the prioritization framing that works best for them as long as the outcomes. We want outcomes over output. As long as the outcomes are being maintained. So once they're capable of moving in, then we allow the PMs to roll their own. Because everybody thinks differently, and I don't want my really technical guy to have to think like me because it's going to be bad. And I don't want to think like him because it's going to go nowhere. So once we can kind of agree on how things are working and what our key pieces are in the cycle from an outcome point, that next iteration just says, okay, you're good at what you do. How can you optimize your value stream? And then work with that so that we have our regular touch points. I haven't talked about meetings or cadences or the ceremonies or anything like that because frankly, I think those things are irrelevant. They're really up to the company and to you. You should have some and you should have some consistent meetings so you know what's going on, what those look like. That's negotiable. But as long as the outcomes and the cadences that we've agreed to are happening in the way we want to happen, at that point, you can let people experiment on their own. And that becomes them being empowered to do their thing. Because in the end, if we're doing good product, that radical empowerment that we're looking for helps drive that. And then ideally, product ops, if they leave the company, they can go on to something bigger, better, because we've made them, given them an environment in which they can be better PMs and they can move on and do better things or move up within the company. So, as I said, I had kind of a cadence of where I want to be. And when I came in, it was where I wanted to be in a year. Reality stepped in. It's really, where do I want to be in 2 years? We're a large enterprise. We're migrating. We're consolidating. I can't get it all done fast enough, period. There's just simply not a bandwidth from everybody. So I have to be realistic about what I can deliver in what amount of time, which is why it's important for me to be clear on what our biggest issues are. So I hit the fundamentals. We worked out a JIRA. We added some new software in to centralize pieces and planning, and we're not even using the full features of Product Board yet. They're adding on, and I'm starting to kind of show them and hint at them. Hey, we've got these great things you can use. And then working better with the discovery teams and the cross-functional teams to build out the different frameworks for discovery, prioritization, and business justification, and so on. And wash, rinse, repeat. So when we get to that platonic ideal, we may have hit something entirely different than we planned on. In the end, I don't need to care whether I hit that mark. I need to be clear that whatever we did build along the way does what we needed to do in the best way possible for us. There is no end state, right? We're going to get there. Somebody's going to come along with a new framework. I'll see Steve at another conference and say, hey, we made these tweaks. That's brilliant. You know, these sorts of things. So the idea being is you're always refining. Frameworks help you put a boundary around it. So that if you've got it and came up like me in product where you're reading all this stuff, but there wasn't a clear cohesive way they all came together, you've got a box within to work. So you know how people are doing these things and you can tie these things again. their feedback loops. Adjust the framework if you're not getting the feedback loop you need on. You don't have to invest 20 billion frameworks. Sometimes a framework is literally just saying, you know what, we're going to do it this way for us, and this is the process we're going to follow. It's a framework. It's just a outline, it's a spine on how we actually implement how things actually happen. And we have to be realistic at PMs working in a job that requires us to be uncertain 90% of the time, that we can't be certain, and we shouldn't be certain about our processes because they can always be better. And we don't rest on our laurels and let things shift. So with that, I'm going to kind of open it up for questions. Like I said, this is a fairly loose philosophical take on that. If I said anything you disagree with, please put that in the notes. Some of the best conversations I have had at Product Camp and elsewhere have been minor and major disagreements with other PMs. Those have been the most valuable pieces, because what I love about this field is there's no one way to do it. Everybody's going for the same outcome, but there's 20 ways to get there, and they're not always going to work for you or your company. And I think that's actually kind of cool. So any questions from the room?
You talked a lot about product management as being very product operation, very sensitive product management. How much engineering need to be along with it? I know I've seen a lot of.
Yes, it's a great question.
A lot of processes.
Right. So a lot of process depends on engineering, UX, and other constituents you have as primary stakeholders. They need to be along for the ride pretty closely. In our case, we have a very close relationship with engineering, so they're not so much of an issue. In fact, when we've made changes, they've been the first to come back and say, hey, we love this. So it really kind of depends on where you're starting out at. If you've got a very distant or antagonistic relationship between engineering, then I would say pull them in early on, because they're partners. So when we talk product operations, that encompasses how we interact with our stakeholders, and engineering is one of them. So a lot of what you're doing there needs to pull everybody in early. Who you focus the most on when really depends on where your biggest gaps are.
Real quick, Chuck, note that the sound still didn't pick up, so we're not gonna worry about that microphone.
Okay. She was asking how early do we bring engineering in?
I have a similar question, and not so much an engineering kind of, I've been able to bring a framework we usually get it in your tech teams on board pretty quick. I'm actually curious for the same question with the executive and sort of leadership.
Right. How do we get how do we get the executives bought in?
You said something that really struck home with me, which is how do we tie this into corporate goals?
Right.
Which I think is extremely, we've had some nebulous ones. And then the other challenge is I've always had is sort of this concept of, hey, we're gonna build an MVP and then sort of iterate the prototype. Generally, what the expectation is, where I've been has been, I want to know exactly what I'm getting before we start.
Right.
And I've always personally struggled with that. So in terms of,
Right. Marketing and sales want to know because they got to be able to sell it, right? So yeah, we are working with various tensions when dealing with leadership or external groups who expect to kind of know everything early on. And so how do we get them bought in? And I would say leadership is critical, because you're not going to have any cultural change unless leadership has been bought in. They have to push that down and say, we've got our backing. And some of the early conversations I had was, hey, do we have the C-suite's buy-in on making these changes? Are they along with us so that we know they're going to reinforce this? Some of that's also going to depend on how interventionist your C-suite is. If they're fairly interventionist, they like to change the roadmaps. Hey, we've got to do this now, we've got to do that. I've had cases where I've worked with groups where I've said, you need to pick a priority. I will do whatever priority you want us to do, but you need to be clear and tell me this is not going to change for X period of time. I've had this with EVPs in particular pieces where they come back and this is most important, this is most important. I've already said, you can only have so many most important things. I can do 5 things. If you want me to do this, what goes out the window? So a lot of the way I've put that in is, we tend to see that as very much adversarial. Sometimes it's simply they don't have the data because we haven't given it to them to make a good decision. No leader, and this is my politicking, wants to make a bad decision, so let's help them make a good one. Sometimes it's data. Sometimes it's seeing the piece on there. Sometimes it's putting your feet in the sand and going, God, I hope I don't get fired for this. I can't do both. Which one do you want? Here's the ramifications. As you get further up, and you're a director, you see this, those pieces are where we try to put the fights for the PMs. So there's a lot of blocking and tackling that go on there. And that was one thing at places I've worked before where CEOs changed things left and right. And so part of my job is to say, I'm going to run the running and tackling. I'm going to get the bloody nose. As far as getting buy-in beyond that, some of that is the best way to do it is to prove it works, which is why the small things can come out. And coming into them, and if they're small enough, they tend not to put much of a role because it doesn't feel like it's threatening their processes. And we can demonstrate how this plays in. And sometimes what I've seen is you get a critical mass where they say, hey, these things have been improving. Hey, I want to do this next. What do you think about that? It makes that a bit easier, especially if they don't get it. You know, and sometimes it's not for lack of trying on your part. They're just not seeing it in the way. They're dealing on a, you know, entire different plane than we are. So the things that they care about really differ. So it doesn't always make sense unless they've got that piece. And this is true for sales. This is true for, you know, your VP of marketing, depending on those pieces. The further they are away from you and the more distant they are from you as a stakeholder, those are the ones you need to pull in first. Unless the ones you have really close are causing lots of chaos, in which case you've got to put them in constraints first before you move on to somebody else. Anyone else? What did I get wrong? Or even better yet, when you've set up stuff, what did you do that worked to help kind of the overall process? I've got a very narrow experience on my way. I know I've talked to people at meetups and so on who've done things with design groups, and how they do sprints and discovery that really kind of help the overall process. Do you have experiences like that that you'd be willing to share?
Hey, Chuck, could you hear me? I'm calling in from
Yes,
the
we
digital.
can.
Hey, I actually had a quick question. So some context for a Scrum band area. It's Jason Abda, by the way. Good to see you, man. I'm glad you were able to present today. So quick question. Have you found a good mechanism outside of PowerPoints and maybe like Jira on steroids to really have a roadmap that's good for C-suite, kind of managing up, showcasing a roadmap across 10 or so product managers, as well as a roadmap that's can be transformed, or a software you can use that can easily then show it to the development team, right? Show them the forward path and what's coming in the next 2 to 3 sprints, but also kind of more of a maybe 1 to 2 quarter outlook. Have you found any software with it that works really well with your framework that makes that easier outside of the double work of bringing it from Jira to a PowerPoint, et cetera? Have you found any software that helps with that?
So I would say that's a work in progress. We are really good at doing very hyper detailed roadmaps that are useless to everybody but us and engineering. And I've had complaints from VPs of the other groups that those roadmaps don't help them. They can't read them. They're not clear on what they're doing. So I've invested a lot of time actually in looking at our chosen tool product board, who I will say, as just a promo to them, have been very responsive to their customers. They've rolled out lots of different ways to manage their roadmaps over the last year, which many have benefited me, some have benefited other people, but I just appreciate the fact that they follow those cadences. I know there's other apps like AHA and folks out there. I haven't used them per se, so I can't speak to them, but I know road mapping is a constant religious war. So in reality, the short answer is no. In practicality, what I've been trying to do, and this goes into tying things to objectives, is build executive roadmaps that just focus on key OKRs and major projects. That still requires me going in and making sure I've filtered for the right things and that we're writing them in ways that make sense. And then going back to those VPs who have complained and say, is this better? Is this worse? Left eye, right eye, that sort of thing, and getting some feedback from there. I will say it's a pain. I think most software, from what I've seen, tends to default on everything you input goes into the roadmap. And frankly, they don't want to know that we are now supporting triple DES algorithm on SCEP enrollment. They really care, have we offered the protocol overall? So I believe right now my hypothesis is that it's going to take a bit of work with the product managers to make sure projects and OKRs are clearly written, or at least at a larger master epic level, we're treating something with more of the executive summary. That is make work, because I've got to go then do that and do this. We integrate with Jira, so this pushes into Jira. So the way we use product board is flight planning. It's the envisioning. We don't, we may do some ordering on there, but you can break it down however you want by your product's value streams. You could mimic your backlog exactly as you want. But Jira is execution. Jira is actually, we're on the flight line, we're going to take off, what planes are going first. So by trying to draw that distinction, we keep more of the envisioning and the road mapping in the product board piece, and then the execution roadmap stuff could be shared, but nobody really does it at our company for that. So that's how we do that. I know Jira has been trying to juice up how they do their roadmaps and fixed versions. So I think some of that is, right now, it's just a lot of experimentation, unless anybody here has had some success with that coming out of that.
Well, that's my
we're also playing with our release cadence, which is impacting our ability to roadmap too right now. So
I can follow up. That's my day-to-day, is playing with product board and well as Jira's advanced road mapping capabilities to, ultimately do a Harvey Ball analysis to bring it to the leadership to say what would they prefer to see. So anyway, I appreciate that context. I think it's a struggle for us as well, and appreciate you commenting on it.
Yeah. Anything you do with product board and Jira, I'd love to have a conversation about, so I can steal the good stuff.
You got it. No problem.
Who else?
Tiago, it looks like you have a comment there. You want to jump on and kind of weigh in?
Yes. Chuck, I think, first of all, I think we don't have enough nails for you to hit in the head with your presentation. That was that was exactly with some of the things we were talking the other day during the happy hour. So one thing we are experimenting today for the roadmap view is to have two views in product boards. One using the now, next, future format that will give you more of a product vision, and something a little more tactical that I'm not even calling a roadmap, I'm calling a product plan, which is really leveraging the integration with Jira Software, so you can see, well, for this specific feature, what is the release this is tied to? So you can push things to Jira, it updates real time, and if you want to have a more product development view of how things are going, but you want to still see how things are tied to the overarching business plan, right, for the company, you can leverage that. We'll see how this will go. We're just starting this effort right now. To your point, Chuck, it's like we want to make sure that everybody understands what the roadmap really is, right? And everybody understands like what we are prioritizing and how the capabilities and features that we are prioritizing with our products, how they are related to the business objectives. And I think that's really key.
Great. And I will say, we've hit product board. I like product board. Your mileage may vary. I don't think there's one software that everyone will like and is appropriate. I like product board. They have opinions about how products should be done, but they don't force it on you. And they also live what they're putting out. They're very good in terms of doing interviews, doing testing, and getting pieces out there. But that said, there's AHA, who's a big one out there. There's plenty of others that if you work, I rarely recommend software. I like what these guys are doing. And if you wanted to use them, I would say, yes, I've had a very good experience with them. But just like frameworks, I don't really necessarily believe in you should use this, it will solve your problems, it won't. And just like how I waste multiple hours trying to become more productive, I spend a lot of time in product board kind of looking at what can I do here, what can I do there. So in the end, even if I didn't have product board, I'm just using Trello or I'm using Excel, those same fundamentals hold. Because in the end, it's the outcome that matters, not necessarily the method you use. It's just how are you getting there and how do you know what those things are doing.
I'm actually, there there's so many products. To your point, I was actually just recalling back, Rima even was kind of one of the early innovator or the early creators of some software for product managers to manage that roadmap. And they got acquired by somebody, I can't remember who, but that was back at the first product camp Atlanta. We had them. I've used AHA pretty extensively. And to your point, it really comes down to figuring out what's going to work with your whole organizational stack and how your stakeholders need to interact with the tools that you have, how that information is going to be communicated. I saw Steve commented in the chat there as well that, you know, there are lots of tools in place, but still the most common way to get your roadmap all together and in front of people is PowerPoint.
But they want to consume it in PowerPoint.
Yep.
So I mean, their product board will let you export an image format file of your roadmap. And I've had people say, but I want it in PowerPoint. I'm like, well, it's an image, we'll put it in PowerPoint. But they can monkey with it, right? It's an issue of control on there. So yeah, that's that cultural thing, and providing those artifacts that you need, which is why I'm a big favor of minimal artifacts. That way, when somebody throws something at you, it's not there. And I would say too, the danger of any fully fledged piece is that if they believe it should be done this way, you're going to have to work the way that software wants you to work. So you want to find something that at least gives you some flexibility, or you wholeheartedly buy into their method, because that can be a trap as well by being forced. I mean, we see that with Jira, right? Jira has a way it thinks about the way things are done. Some things jive with the way I believe the world is, and other things are like, no way in hell. I'm just not going to use it from there. So, you know, test it, get it out there. There's so many companies out there. They'll give you POCs, see who's going to work with you and what plays with you, and, you know, be honest with them. All right. Any other questions? I will stop jabbering.
Looks like
Chuck,
Steve's got one.
Yeah, I want to agree with what you said and come at it in a different way. I mean, the whole point of the frameworks that you've been talking about and the visualizations that you talk about is effectively a prototyping the deliverables. And the point, a long-standing truth is you can't do anything with software until you can do it on paper. If you can't get leadership to agree what a roadmap looks like, then it doesn't matter what software you chose. And it seems to me most executives can't decide whether they want a true roadmap, which is a prototype of your strategy or a visualization of your strategy, versus where's my feature and what day of the week do I get it, which is really, you know, where's my Jira ticket? And that's not a roadmap at all. Right. I find most teams use the term roadmap when they mean release schedule. So do it on paper before you commit yourself to software.
That's good advice. All right. Thank you, everybody. Please feel free. I'd love any comments, feedback, presentation, and so on. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Like I said, I'm always happy to steal from everybody when you're doing good stuff. I've stolen everything I do from everybody else, so you're welcome to it too. Thank you.
And I want to, you know, once again, I want to thank Chuck and Steve for joining us today. And I want to thank the folks who are here together in Atlanta, down at the WeWork in Buckhead at Terminus. Hopefully next time we'll have some of the kinks worked out. I've got a few ideas already. Definitely fill out that survey. It's on the resources page that is on your screen in front of my face right now. There, I moved it, or I moved me. But thank you for joining us today, and looking forward to seeing you all back here next week. Thanks a lot and have a great week. Bye.